Philip Fry has decided that it's time to start planning for his retirement. While he and Bender are at the bank to open a retirement fund, an old friend of Bender's, a robot named Roberto, holds the place up and takes it for all it's worth. He threatens Fry and Bender into helping him, and hands them each a share of the cash for their trouble before making his escape. Unfortunately, Fry and Bender are arrested for their part in the robbery, and it doesn't look good for them. In a Hail Mary, they plead insanity, and against all odds the judge accepts it. Bender is sent to the HAL Institute for Criminally Insane Robots, and upon being informed the human mental hospital is full, the judge has Fry sent there as well. Things immediately take another turn for the worse, as the doctors refuse to acknowledge that Fry is a human, and diagnose him as a robot that erroneously believes that it's human. Over the following days in the asylum, as he's gaslit on all sides, Fry's emotional state rapidly deteriorates to the point of suffering a complete mental breakdown. Shortly thereafter, the rest of the Planet Express crew are informed that Fry has been deemed ready for release. They celebrate, only for their joy to turn to horror as they see Fry has been cured of his delusions of humanity. Back at the office, his coworkers try desperately to remind Fry of the truth about himself, to no avail. He's too busy trying to discover his primary function, and left feeling useless when he can't. Meanwhile, a new inmate arrives at the asylum. Roberto, having been arrested for robbing the same bank again. He coerces Bender into helping him stage a breakout, and the two go on the run. Eventually, they decide to hide out at the Planet Express building, where Roberto takes everyone hostage, including Bender. Fry, now believing himself to be a battle droid, attacks Roberto. Roberto's knife nicks Fry's arm, but then the evil robot ends up falling out of the building through the window into the waiting arms of the police. As the others praise him for his courage, Fry is happy to have finally discovered his robotic purpose, but when he sees the bright red blood dripping from the cut in his arm, he is shocked out of his delusions and realizes that he is a human being. Bender reassures Fry, telling him that inside, he has the powerful heart of a robot. Welcome to Space Podcast 3000, where the future is in the past. So this episode opens with the characters talking about their pensions, but who the fuck can afford to retire nowadays?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Maybe it's better 1,000 years in the future.
We can hope, I guess.
And the funny thing is, I worked for the school district for like 5-6 months, 10 years ago, and they still send me like my interest on my retirement plan that was through this school. It accumulates like 40 cents a year because there's like $26 in the account.
Oh.
But they still keep sending me updates on it, which is kind of funny.
I mean, I guess they gotta for, legal reasons.
Obviously, but I just find that funny that it's, oh yeah, I worked for them.
It's probably just automated.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Anyway, so this episode's the first appearance of Roberto, and, he's an enjoyable character.
I was wondering, is this his first appearance? Because he seems familiar.
I'm pretty sure this was his first appearance. He might have been in a previous episode.
No, I think this first appearance.
He did become a very popular character, so you may know him through osmosis.
Yeah.
Let me check. There's a wiki. Roberto.
He might have been a background character at some point.
Recurring character. First appearance, Insane in the Mainframe.
Okay.
Yeah. He is an enjoyable character, but I do feel the need to point out that statistically, the mentally ill are far more likely to be the victims of violent crime rather than the perpetrators.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I just saw a post, last night that talked about schizophrenics and how they're much more likely to be the victims of violence.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's going to hurt you, they're going to be a normal person.
The real causes of crime are societal, economic things. You know, the way to stop crime isn't to like lock people away, but to address the root causes that force people to turn to it. But that's a topic for another episode.
Yeah, this is
this whole thing episode. The plot of this is basically the plot of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where where he pleads insanity because he thinks an asylum will be easier to deal with than prison, and ultimately easier to break out of.
But like, yeah, well, there's also the other reference to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Nurse Ratched.
Yeah, which I know, they were fucking in love with that pun. Because they put it on her chest.
It's a really good pun.
It is a really good pun. You want them to be like, yeah, this is Nurse Ratched. And you have to make sure that they can read that it's Nurse Ratched, not Nurse Ratched, because the names are pronounced very similarly to each other.
And, like, again, this is in the HAL Institute for Criminally Insane Robots, which is, you know, the 2001 A Space Odyssey.
And, yeah, HAL was a criminally insane robot, or AI, at least.
Well, let's clarify. HAL only did
what he was programmed to do, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The book actually clarifies that he was given additional orders that the astronauts were not aware of, and they were directly conflicting with each other, which basically led Hal to try to kill them to resolve the contradiction. It was in keeping with his program. He wasn't insane. It was, yeah. Frankly, the book answers a lot of questions you might have after watching the movie.
Yeah, it's just a perception of him being insane.
Yeah. But, like, even before the asylum part of this episode, bank robbery is honestly super unprofitable.
Oh, absolutely.
They only keep so much in the tills. Their money's all invested. It's not like they keep an absurd amount locked in a vault.
Give a man a gun, he can rob a bank. Give a man a bank, he can rob the world.
Wow, we live in a society.
Yeah. And yeah, the real theft at banks is you have to do it through the system itself. You have to, like, anything that's going on with banks would be, physical bank robbery, that's a terrible idea. You'd want to hack the system if you're going to rob anything. Steal billions.
And honestly, the trial is such a farce.
I think all the trials are a farce. That's why they got a chicken lawyer.
Yeah, but this one especially, like, the security camera only shows the moment when Roberto handed Fry and Bender some money. Surely it also recorded the context that exonerates them. It's just so contrived. And then the judge outright hears, if you testify, you'll be killed, but he still rules guilty? Like, I don't have words to describe this level of judicial incompetence and or corruption. But given that this same judge apparently ruled that poverty is a mental illness, I shouldn't be surprised.
And he had to have bank robbery explained to him.
Yeah. But, like, let's just talk about the criminalization of poverty for a second. Because that is such a fucking problem.
Which is the joke. It's like, that money could be put to more... that's what they... Like, brevity is the soul of wit. They say something in 2 seconds that has so much weight behind it that you have to spend the next... 20 minutes decompressing it, and that's where humor comes from. The fact that something so awful is put so succinctly, and that's wit, that's humor, that's comedy, that's the essence of comedy in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even beyond that one issue, this episode is just so stressful to watch. Because, a significant chunk of it is just Fry being systematically tortured and gaslit.
Poor Fry.
Which, it's a farce. You have to accept that the entire episode is a farce. It's the joke that they want him to think that he's a robot so that he can be made normal again when he's not a robot, and that's the entire joke. That's the entire premise of why everything is a farce, it's a classic farce setup where someone has to pretend to be something they're not, and then suddenly they are supposed to pretend to be that something that they aren't.
It still makes me so uncomfortable. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, poor Fry. Just throughout this whole episode, you just can't help but feel sorry for him.
He's a month later, and he's just absolutely drenched in his own underarm sweat and everything, and surviving off of the sick vending machine, which is... I like that they established him, they established the machine before.
I do like how they did actually answer the question of how he's somehow surviving in this robot asylum that doesn't even have human food. But let's talk about the other patients for a second, because they're interesting. Like Norm, who picks up CIA transmissions in his teeth.
Except it's just cafeteria announcements.
Yeah,
It's still CIA transmissions.
It's a good joke, though. But, like, yeah, there is that old urban legend about people picking up radio transmissions in their tooth fillings, but that's never been proven as far as I know.
That would be crazy.
And then there's that Lincoln robot with multiple personalities. He's like, I was born in 200 log... Yeah.
Just like, set up and then just one punchline and then nothing else. It's just mic drop, done. I was born in 200 log cabins. Mic drop, done. Never brought up again.
So I actually have a friend with dissociative identity disorder. If you're listening to this, hi, Demo. It does not remotely work like that. Like, the common perception of quote-unquote multiple personalities does not resemble plurality at all. It is an entirely different sort of thing. And, like, you know, it functions differently for different people, but, you know.
Obviously.
Yeah.
I had something funky happening in high school with my brain.
Oh?
Yeah, I called them facets to my personality, and they'd kind of come up as I needed them.
That does sound like some kind of a plural system.
Yeah, but once I graduated high school, it was gone.
I have heard that integration can be possible when it's no longer needed.
Yeah, it wasn't needed anymore.
Although not every system wants to integrate. Like my aforementioned friend Demo, there's like 300 alters in that brain, and they don't want to integrate. They're fine, and you know they do okay. And I know plenty of other systems not too well, but I've seen a bunch who don't care about. So, like, treating integration and trying to return to just being one identity should not be the goal. The goal should be whatever the system wants, whatever, works for them.
Yeah.
It's like what we were talking about last episode, this idea of forced normality and
forced normalcy, yeah.
And conforming, yeah. As opposed to just whatever's best for the person.
But the asylum doesn't seem too bad. At least the patients are being treated well. It just seems bad in since we're seeing it through Fry's eyes.
It doesn't seem bad if you're a robot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The problem is just it's Fry.
I remember you were laughing your ass off with malfunctioning Eddie like every time he exploded.
That wasn't me. That was Eden.
Oh.
I just find random explosions funny.
In fairness, they can be.
Like, oh, actually, we have met once before. What?
I assume, Eden, that you've seen the old laser collection animations from the earlier days.
Oh yeah, I've seen them. Those are classics.
Mm-hmm. So, we need to touch on some heavy subjects now, because one thing that this episode really made me think of. So with the asylum only letting Fry out once he agrees and believes that he's a robot, have either of you ever heard of the Rosenhan Experiment?
It sounds familiar, but please go ahead and refresh my memory.
So in the early 70s, Rosenhan and several associates pretended to experience hallucinations in order to get themselves admitted into psychiatric hospitals. And then once there, they immediately started acting normally again and told the staff their hallucinations had stopped. Even so, not one of them were identified as faking by any of the hospital staff, even though many of the other patients in the hospitals figured it out. Doctors ended up pathologizing their normal behaviors, recasting everything they did through the lens of mental illness. For example, one of them taking notes on the conditions that they were experiencing, which was reimagined as a compulsive behavior, and all but one of them were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it took an average of 2.5 weeks for them to get themselves released. And for Rosenhan itself, himself. He was there for nearly 2 months. Additionally,
Wow.
all of them were required to admit to having mental illness and to agree to take antipsychotic medication before they were able to be released. And the conditions that they suffered while they were there, they reported things like severe invasion of privacy, with things like random searches of their possessions, sometimes being watched while they were in the bathroom, feeling ignored and dehumanized, contact being avoided by the staff except when necessary to do their jobs, having staff talk about them like they weren't there. Even in some cases, they reported being verbally or physically abused. And just,
Yeah.
that's what I think about with this episode, with Fry, and how he gets stuck in this asylum, and they refuse to let him out until he's like, fine, I'm a robot. And now, of course, there were problems with the Rosenhan experiment. Mental diagnosis, more than any other type of medical care, relies largely, pretty much exclusively, on patients self-reporting their symptoms. So it absolutely makes sense that issues would arise when the patient outright lies to the doctors. But when someone tells you they're experiencing something, definitely do not assume that they're lying. Frankly, a lot more harm could come that way.
Yeah.
But that said, like, all of this said, despite the issues with the experiment, it did reveal a lot about the harm that can happen when you stigmatize mental illness and dehumanize your patients. And it did end up leading to significant reform of mental institutions, so it's not like there wasn't a positive impact.
Yeah, mental institutions of the past definitely had major issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was familiar with the experiment, just not with the name of it. I knew I had heard stories about what this happened. I just didn't know it as that name.
Yeah, but like, there's a reason that mental institutions are like a stock horror setting. They are, once upon a time, they could be really terrible and abusive, and like, it can still happen now, but like, that this shit used to be rampant.
I know there's still a lot of, I guess, is it invasion of privacy, I suppose?
Oh yeah, that's still very
of
much a thing.
Yeah, that's very rampant.
And you combine that with like stuff like the Stanford prison experiment, and any sort of institutionalized stuff like this just sounds awful.
Well, the Stanford prison experiment is a very different situation.
It's a very different situation, but you could see a lot of parallels with the two. It's like, this person is in charge, that means they're inherently better than the other person, and they decide whether they get reintegrated into society or not.
No, I mean, because the Stanford prison experiment was a bunch of bullshit. Like, very immediately, people started questioning their results, and like, it's come out since then that the people running the Stanford prison experiment deliberately manufactured the results.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they knew what conclusion they wanted going in, and they straight up like encouraged the abusive behavior and basically forced it to happen. They were pushing for that one result, and that, like, just that kind of interfering with the data renders the whole thing just, worthless as a study. It's garbage data. And in fact, from what I've read, like, before they started intervening, things were kind of pretty civil in there, with like guards actually befriending the quote-unquote inmates a lot. And then they just pushed for the other behaviors and encouraged it. Also, you have to bear in mind the level of self-selection for this kind of a thing, where the kind of people who would volunteer to be guards for an experiment like that would naturally be more likely to attract the sort of people who would be willing to get aggressive when told to do so.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, whenever someone cites a Stanford prison experiment, I have to point out that that whole thing was just garbage.
It's essentially been discredited.
Oh yeah, very thoroughly.
I believe Vsauce did their own version of the Stanford prison experiment to, well, as they say, a good experiment is repeatable. So he basically tried to repeat it in a different way, like not in the same context, but trying to test the same theory. And I forget exactly what the results were.
I don't watch Vsauce, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, it's a good series. You'd probably enjoy it.
Maybe. I just haven't watched it. Although actually, on the subject of, like, psychological stuff and abuses, so in the hostage scene, Bender mentions Stockholm Syndrome.
Oh.
And
that's another bullshit.
Oh, yes. Like, fun fact. Stockholm Syndrome was invented by a criminologist working for the Stockholm police after they completely bungled a hostage situation. Basically, the police's incompetent handling of it nearly got the hostages killed. They were just super aggressive and even pointed guns at the criminals while the hostages were directly in the line of fire. To the point that, like, supposedly, according to the hostages, one of the criminals actually, like, moved to stand between them and the guns. And, like, the hostages, somewhat rightly, realized that the criminals cared more about keeping them alive than the cops did.
Yeah.
And then when one of the victims, who happened to be a woman, mind, shared this story with the media, this dude, on the police's payroll, made up the idea of Stockholm Syndrome to discredit them. So basically, Stockholm Syndrome is fictional bullshit with no actual proof to back it up, fabricated by a man to slander a woman who spoke up against the malpractice of his colleagues.
Oh, gross, sweet man-made horrors of society.
Yeah. And yet people constantly bring up Stockholm Syndrome like it's a real thing.
They do. And it's just so annoying when they do.
Yep. Even the Wikipedia page for it, like, lists other examples of supposed Stockholm Syndrome happening, even though it, like, does acknowledge that many people believe that it's not really a thing. It's like playing both sides of the argument. Wikipedia is a great resource, but it's not always perfect, just because, you know...
Yeah.
Wikipedia is a good source for sources. Always check the sources on Wikipedia.
Yes, it's a good starting point.
If you're writing a research paper, don't cite Wikipedia, cite the sources that Wikipedia cites.
Well, check those sources first.
Well, obviously, yeah, but if that's the important thing, is like, if you are going to make an argument, make sure you cite your sources so that if people can discredit it, they can discredit the source, not the argument itself. Which is one of my favorite things about Adam Ruins Everything, is that pretty much every statement he makes, he lists the source on screen.
Yeah, that was great.
That was a great show. And you know what killed it, right? Because Adam talked about that on Twitter.
Oh, he did? What happened to it?
Corporate merger. The show was doing well, but the network got bought out, and the new owners wanted to cut costs.
Yeah, wanted to cut costs.
See.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, it ended on a good note, at least.
It wasn't the fact that he was tearing down all the institutional information that everybody's been pushing. No, they wanted to cut down costs and stop this guy. Which didn't it start as a web series though?
It did.
It did start as a web series.
Like, the TV series was canceled due to cutting costs. I mean, a lot of other shows were canceled for the same reason at the same time. Like, that Adam Ruins Everything wasn't the only casualty, but, like, Adam brought this up to point out, like, hey, corporate mergers pretty much inevitably lead to people losing their jobs because you suddenly have all this redundancy, and, talking about why they're not a good thing. And I believe he brought this up because of, I think it was in response to the announcement of the Microsoft Activision buyout that he started talking about this. I don't know what else there is to say about this episode.
Yeah, there's a lot of little clever bits in this episode that I really like. The idea of using the laser-proof glass as a shield, it's just a good visual gag, and just it makes sense. Like, he puts his arm through the glass and then uses it as a riot shield as they escape. I thought that was clever.
That raises a question, though. So laser is just light, right? It's just a very focused
future laser,
light.
so of course it bounces off of glass.
No, that's not what I mean. I mean, like, if a glass is laser-proof, it would also be light-proof. So wouldn't it be impossible to see through?
Maybe.
It's very specially made lasers. It's not just because, like, normal light doesn't hurt you. These are very concentrated lasers, so I'm sure it's certain frequencies of light that it blocks.
Yeah.
Maybe. Although you'd think that would, like, distort the image you would see through it, and we don't see anything of that. It's one of those things that makes me just go, huh.
You think it's laser-proof glasses? It's a throw-off line that explains that really it's just a setup for the gag where they fire on them and the laser shoots back at them. So, which I mean, you sort of see that happening. It's like, fire the lasers! Look out, lasers! It's like, yeah, what did you expect?
It's a good joke. And this episode is full of really good jokes. It is a very funny episode, even when it's being stressful as hell.
Yeah.
I even like the bit about him having the bottle of oil in his pocket so that when he gets stabs, he ends up bleeding oil. I feel like that could have been a different reveal. Like, because they immediately show that he ends up stabbing through the oil. I think they could have kind of held off on that for a bit. Like, he stabs him and he bleeds oil, and everybody's, like, surprised, and then later on they find out that they stabbed his thing. I don't know. I guess they just wanted to present it a different way.
Maybe this was just the best way to do it for time.
Possibly. This is a very brisk episode. This episode does move very quickly.
It does.
Even with the time skip.
Especially the last part.
Yeah, like, a lot happens in this episode. First we get, celebrating Zoidberg's 10-year anniversary, then Fry and Bender go to the convenience store, then the bank, and then the bank robbery, the courtroom scene, then the asylum, Fry getting out, and that whole subplot. And then Roberto comes back and that whole thing. A lot happens in this one episode. It's very crammed 20 minutes.
It's kind of like one of those Simpsons episodes where they want to get to a particular location or they want to get to a particular set piece, and it just seems like they worked backwards from there. It's like, okay, we want them to end up in Japan. How do they end up in Japan? It's like, well, they're in Japan because they're taking a Super Saver flight. Okay, why are they taking a Super Saver flight? It's because they're trying to save money because something happened. Okay, what happened? It's just kind of like this backwards completion principle. It's like, okay, what had happened before this? So it's almost like, okay, how do we get Fry into a robot asylum? Okay, let's see. He's sent there with Bender because they robbed a bank.
I mean, it's not a bad way to write a comedy episode.
No, but it's in many cases because you don't see that same sort of thing in like previous episodes, like where the Bugalo roam. They've really just kind of set up the premise there, and it kind of jumps into it right from the start.
That's true, but when you have a high concept like this, it can sometimes take a bit of setup.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a lot to have in one episode.
Yeah, it is a very brisk episode, which of course doesn't leave a whole lot for jokes, but this does have like one of my absolute favorite one-liners or like two-liners in the entire series, like where they wrap him up in bubble wrap and they're pushing him in the box. It's like, ow my head, ow my feet, keep your chin up, Fry, ow my chin.
It's a good it's a very funny episode. I really like this episode. It's good. It's a good episode. It frustrates the hell out of me, watching Fry get tortured so much, but
yeah.
Everything else in this episode is just so goddamn funny.
I suppose part of that is the fact that we don't like seeing Fry get tortured. Like, if this was someone like Zap Brannigan in this situation, I feel like it would be a lot funnier. Oh, probably, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think if this was a Zap episode and it was, Zap in this asylum, he probably, like, they could have just ended the episode with him thinking he was a robot and have that be the final punchline, and it would have been just as satisfying. It's like, have a character you hate and have it end on a final punchline of them suffering, and that can be pretty cathartic. But the way this episode is and the way it's paced, there is one bit that I think they could have cut and still kept the rest of the episode the same. And that being sort of like the opening scene where they're discussing retirement funds. Like, do they really need to have a specific reason for Fry and Bender to be at a bank? Like, they could just be at the bank. People just go to the bank sometimes.
Right, he could have had.
Sometimes you just go to the bank.
Maybe he helped Bender find. I don't know. Maybe Bender found a briefcase of money or something. I don't know.
Maybe, or again, you don't even need to explain why they're at the bank. You could just open with them in line at the bank because, again, people just go to the bank sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
It's an everyday thing. You don't need to explain it.
Well, I guess they wanted to have that joke, kind of a couple of quick-fire jokes about Fry trying to make money And of course they established the talking bills.
I guess, yeah.
Or Nixon is on the $1,000 bill.
Quick, shoot them in the back while they're not looking.
Yeah, that sounds like something Nixon would say.
Actually, what is on the $1,000 bill in real life? Because I know it exists, even though it's primarily for like bank transactions.
I don't think it's a specific president. I think it may be a separate thing.
Grover Cleveland. I don't know, maybe they ran out of presidents they thought were important.
Which is weird because, like, there has to have been other famous American historical figures they could have used.
Right?
Yeah, but you never know.
That said, Andrew Jackson never deserved to be on the 20.
Never.
Fuck Andrew Jackson. Oh yeah, the Biden administration decided to accelerate replacing him with Harriet Tubman.
I've been seeing a lot of comments saying, "Oh, great! I can't wait to start using black people as currency again."
God damn it! So when will the swap happen? When can we stop paying with Andrew fucking Jackson?
I don't know. It may go the way of the Sacagawea dollar.
Okay, so apparently it's caught up in negotiations over a 2008 court order that any new currency has to include some sort of tactile signifier similar to Braille, so that people who are blind or visually impaired can distinguish between them.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Which, other countries, I believe in Europe, the euros are slightly different size based on their denomination.
Yep. Yes, okay. According to the Washington Post article that I'm reading now, the American Council of Blind sued the Treasury Department in 2002 to force this, and a federal judge ordered that, yes, the next overhaul of the nation's currency must include some type of tactile element. And the Harriet Tubman 20 is still just caught up in these negotiations because... basically because banks are objecting to it, saying that it would cost them a ton of money to like upgrade ATMs and such. And they're arguing that the process of stacking currency would become more problematic. But, like, that's kind of bullshit, because, like, Canada, Australia, as you said, Europe, a lot of other countries have had features like that for years now.
And, yeah, it's not like the banks are hurting for fucking money. It's like, yeah, it's the cost of running business. Upgrade your equipment, fuckers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're really bitching about... like, that's what government subsidies are for. It's not like they fucking need them, but I'm sure that's what they're gonna get.
Yeah, well, like, you've got plenty of fucking money. You can afford to upgrade your shit. Also, given that, yeah, this change really would help the blind or the visually impaired, just fucking do it, guys. But, of course, you know, even though the Biden administration is trying to accelerate this, they haven't put their fucking weight behind it, even though they could, because as, like
everything in the Biden administration.
Right? They never actually push for anything. They talk a big game, but then when it comes time to actually do anything, suddenly
it's so frustrating.
Nothing. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm not going to say that it's worse than the Trump administration, who did get things done for the worse, but
yeah,
this really...
It's still frustrating,
nonetheless. It's not that much better.
Yeah, it's really only a marginal difference.
Anyway, back on to the topic of the episode, which I think we're pretty much done discussing at this point. We're way far off the rails.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. It's a good episode.
We'll see Roberto again.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Every time we look up at our...
Let's just promise that we don't weld him to the wall for spilling transmission fluid.
Of course not. Weld him to the wall for trying to kill us! Thank you for listening to Space Podcast 3000. Your three voices of the future are Noble Altman, Doug Hancox, and Eden Valerie. Theme music is Voxel Revolution by Kevin MacLeod. You can support the show and listen to new episodes a full week early at patreon.com/SpacePod3K. Follow us on Twitter at SpacePod3K. Be sure to join us next time as the Planet Express crew become paper boys in The Root of All Evil.